Good evening, everyone. Thank you for turning up. Professor, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. So one of the starting point for Sanat and me when we were preparing for this session was going through the acknowledgement section of your books. And while it was fairly obvious to us that your loved ones, your friends and family have been very supportive of you, what we also noticed was that you refrain from naming them. And in fact, in Nehru and Bose, you also wrote, following the injunction of T.S. Eliot, I will refrain from addressing private words in public. So is there a story behind this step, or is this more of an ideological decision? Also, how much can we expect to learn about your personal life today here?
So there are two somewhat separate questions there. One, to take the acknowledgements or that particular acknowledgement. Those of you who read Eliot know that the reference there is to a poem called Lines for My Wife. And the exact line that I refer to is, these are private words addressed to you in public. Okay? So those who know Eliot will realize immediately who I am thanking in that line. The coded message there is both my wife and I, who is also my closest friend, are very fond of T.S. Eliot. So there's no ideological position there unless you believe that, unless you say that not showing very profound affections in public is an ideological position. So that's the answer regarding the acknowledgements. I'm relatively open to answering questions about my private life. If there is something that I don't want to speak about, I'll tell you that I won't speak about this, and if necessary, I'll tell you why I won't speak about it.
So despite your reservations to talk about your personal life, we did manage to dig up some facts. So your wife, Mrs. Datta, told us that you once rang her from Princeton at 2 a.m. in the morning to ask her if she knew who the founder of the House of Medici was. Your father is a very, he's been very impactful in your formative years. And we were also told that you gave up on a job after your DPhil in order to be with your parents. So you do share a very deep bond with your family, but we also know that your work and your career has required you to travel extensively and also stay away from them for some time. So how difficult has it been to manage your personal life and your professional life?
Yeah, all those facts are undeniable. I don't know what Dwaita wrote back to you. Dwaita is the name of my wife. She referred to her as Mrs. Datta. So obviously I don't call her Mrs. Datta. So I don't know what else Dwaita has told you, but yes, I did ring her once. Or I have rung her several times to get facts like this from her. And this was a notorious occasion which she hasn't forgiven me for, where Indian Standard Time, 2 a.m. in the morning, I rang her and to find out who the head of the Medici house was. I do that because she has a remarkable memory, and she remembers everything that she reads, and so it's easy for me to just pick up the phone and ask her, hey, what is this about? Do you know about this? So on and so forth, and she gives me an answer, and 100 times out of 100, it is correct. So this is a kind of dependence I've developed. So yeah, that is correct. And till the age of 18, I would say my father was the most important influence on my life. He was also a very, very good friend of mine. I don't think there's anything that we didn't speak about, including my private life. And we read the same books, and all except for one abiding interest in my life, all the other abiding interests that I have in my life, reading, films, theater, all came from him. He nurtured them. He nurtured them very deliberately. The one abiding interest which he didn't imbibe in me is my love for Western classical music. He was not a very musical person. He loved the songs of Tagore, but beyond that, nothing more. My musical tastes run in a completely different direction. So that has been very important to me, very, very important to me. And I was very close to both my parents. With my father, it was more of an intellectual bond. With my mother, like with all mothers, it was more emotional, an umbilical tie bond, if you like. Yeah, I mean, when I finished my DPhil in Oxford, I could have stayed on in England or sought a job in the US. I chose not to do it. I chose not to do it because from the age of 17 or 18, I knew that I would have to look after my parents as they were getting old. And this was a sense of self-imbibed responsibility, if you want, the lack of a better term. So it was not really much of a tough choice to make. It was already made for me. So my DPhil Viva took place on the 5th of January. I left England on the 10th of January. Okay, so the decision had already made that I would come back. And I came back with some risks because in spite of DPhil from Oxford, I was unemployed for 8 months. Okay, so if I hadn't come back, if I'd taken some of the jobs that were on offer, I wouldn't have been unemployed for 8 months. Anyway, so that's a different part of the story. I have traveled, I have had to travel because of my job, but I have never been distant from my parents in that sense, because in the days when there were no internet, no WhatsApp, and even no mobile phones, and there was a large period when there was no landline phones either to make direct calls. I wrote to them regularly, once a week, sometimes twice a week. And then when the phone lines came and I was traveling, I spoke to them every day. So the first thing I'd do in the morning is that I would speak to them and find out how they were, tell them how I was. The tougher bit was to manage a courtship and then a marriage which was long distance. And well, I have known Dwaita from 1973. We and the relationship has survived, so we must have. It hasn't always been easy, but it has survived, so I presume we did manage. But it wasn't easy.
Professor, you grew up in a politically very turbulent atmosphere. So, how was your life as a college student in that sort of an atmosphere? And how did these experiences influence if at all they did, influence the decisions you made then on?
Yeah, it was very turbulent, more turbulent than you can ever imagine. So I finished school. I took my what was then called the senior Cambridge exam in 1969. Many of your parents may not have been married then. So I joined college in 1970 August. So the decision which college I would go to, I had already taken that decision when I was in class 10, so in 1968. It was Presidency College. Calcutta by 1967-68 had already fallen prey to or had become involved in Maoist violence or Naxalite violence, that is often referred to or then was referred to in Calcutta. And Presidency was the nerve center of that movement in Bengal and in Calcutta. So in spite of that, I chose to go to that college. And I might be getting the specific dates wrong, but I don't think so. I think our classes started on around the 19th or the 20th of August. And on 18th September, that date I know, on 18th September, college closed down sine die, that is to say, till further notice, because of student violence. There was a pitched battle between the police and the students on the college campus. A lot of property was broken, libraries burnt, laboratories smashed, and so the authorities closed the college down. So I was a first year student, no classes. So it was quite a shock, and the dreams of studying in Presidency, etc., suddenly seemed at the point of evaporating. But everything has a silver lining, and so there was a very famous and leading historian in Calcutta who I knew, who, though formally, he was not a teacher of mine, but he was a very important mentor in my intellectual development as a historian, a man called Borunde. So I went to Borunde and said, classes have stopped, but that doesn't mean I have to stop learning. I went to college to learn, so what do I do about it? So he said, take that pad. Have you got a pen? So I said, yes. He said, sit down. And that gave me a reading list just of Indian history that ran into 12 pages, handwritten 12 pages, list of books. And he said, tomorrow morning, go to the National Library, fill up a form, and begin to read. Okay? So that's what I did till college reopened. Every day I was at the National Library at 10 o'clock, and I would leave the National Library at 5. And I began reading that reading list. Many of the books had nothing to do with the syllabus that the Calcutta University was offering at the undergraduate level at that point of time. So I just read. So that's how I began to educate myself as a student of history. Then, of course, college reopened after 5 months, and classes resumed. So then things fell into a rhythm. So it was a very turbulent, very, very turbulent phase. And I took away certain lessons from the college while I was still in the college about this kind of student turbulence. One is that student politics could not be divorced from learning, from reading, writing, studying. And the Naxalite movement was trying to do that. One of the great slogans of the Naxalite movement is that the more you study, the more stupid you become. So, and they coined that rather infamous phrase, China's chairman is our chairman. So I couldn't accept either of these two premises. These seemed to me a peculiar kind of odd blindness that was being propagandized or being taught. So I realized that I couldn't follow these kinds of tenets or these kinds of politics. So I stayed away from this kind of politics completely.
So the brief exchange of emails we had with your wife hinted to us that you prefer to travel in comfort and luxury. So while that might be your choice or style of travel, what I'm more interested in is how do you choose your travel destination? So do the books you read, the movies you watch, that help you make this decision, or is there some other particular thought process that goes behind this?
Yes, traveling in comfort is relatively new. Now I can afford to travel in comfort, so I travel in comfort. There was a time in my life that I couldn't travel in comfort, then I didn't travel in comfort. So, ideas in their context. Comfort has a context as well. The idea of comfort has a context as well. Yeah, so how do I choose my destinations? Largely through the books I read and what I want to see, and this is where I travel most of the time with Dvaita, and this is where our converging interests, we grew up together, as I said, from 1973, we've known each other, we met in college. I was 20, she was 17, so it was a presidency college romance. Romance in the time of turbulence, too. So it's largely to do with what our common interests are. History, art. I mean, we are compulsive visitors to art galleries, and often we choose destinations in terms of what galleries there are to see, what historical buildings and monuments there are to see, so on and so forth. And so that's how, and what we have read about these places. I think that's what determines. And in my case, not so much in her case, though she always comes along, my case also, when I'm there, will there be a chance to listen to a good Western classical music concert? So that is another reason for choosing destination. Also, I should add, my travel destinations are mostly European. I look westwards rather than eastwards. That's not the case with Dvaita. She's a better traveled person than I am. So she's been all over the place. She's been to China, Vietnam, she's been to Cambodia. She hasn't been to Japan, but I've been to Japan. But I've been to Japan on work, I haven't been to Japan as a tourist. So yeah, that's how we choose our destinations.
So we know of at least two things which you've been really passionate about: cricket and Western classical music. So we've been told that you regularly attend test matches and you've yourself played some cricket. But what she also mentioned to us was that of late you have detached yourself from cricket, while on the other hand, according to her, music sustains you. So, in fact, you also mentioned to us in class once, as respect, as a mark of respect to Beethoven, you removed your shoes in front of Lobkow's palace in Prague, where his Sixth Symphony score is stored. So, why is it that cricket took this backseat, but music has been an integral part of your life?
So cricket was a very early passion. It was the passion of my life. Okay, till the age of 15, I had no other ambition except playing cricket for India. Okay, everything else was secondary, very, very secondary. I read about cricket, I thought about cricket, I played cricket. And this was a love, this was a passion that was fostered by my father. He had a cricket library, which is still with me. It's part of my library now, about 1,000 cricket books. And he knew most of those books back to front. And, well, if you didn't love cricket, you couldn't have a conversation with my father. So cricket was a part of the everyday conversation in our lives. My sister is my elder sister, my only sibling is also a cricket lover. She's quite an expert on cricket. So again, nurtured by my father. So that's how it started. I mean, the first books I read, I mean, most English medium educated students of my generation or a generation before me start their reading through Enid Blyton, the William books, and so on and so forth. I started by reading cricket books. Okay, so it was a very, very deep passion. So somewhere, I think towards the middle of 1967, I was in class 9. I had a very bad academic year. The first half of that academic year had been very bad. Even by my standards, it was very bad. Principally because I had been playing too much cricket and completely neglecting my studies. And in the summer vac, I sat back to review. I had just received my first term report and I could see I had done very badly, and I thought what was going on, and so I had to make a choice between cricket and studies. And the unfortunate conclusion I came to was that however much I loved cricket, and I was not a very bad player, but my talents were just not good enough to take me to test match level. Or if I had to go to test match level, that amount of time I would have to devote to cricket would mean I would have to stop studying in school. I would have to play cricket 12, 14 hours every day to hone my talents and go up to the level I wanted to go to. This was not an option to me. I couldn't be a school dropout. Okay? And I don't think my father, however much he loved me and loved cricket, would allow me to do that. So I decided, cricket would have to take a second position and studies would have to come first. So I changed my priorities, and from the second term onwards, my results became entirely different because I was studying more than I was playing cricket. But the love for cricket didn't go, but the love for cricket, and I continue to watch cricket wherever cricket was being played and I happened to be present. So a large part of my time in Oxford, the summer terms at least, was spent in watching cricket. And my college tutor often used to tell me that if you didn't watch cricket so much, you'll get your thesis done faster. So I watched cricket. I love to watch it. And in India, I watched it. In England, I watched it. And then the match fixing scandal broke in the 1990s. Some of you might remember. And I remember when the scandal broke, I was in America when the news broke that players players who had seen play, some of whom, like Azharuddin, whose batting I absolutely loved, had been involved in fixing matches. And believe it or not, it was one of those rare occasions in my adult life that all on my own, I wept. I actually cried because something I felt, something inside me had been broken. And since then, I've lost interest in cricket. And I certainly don't watch T20. I've practically stopped watching one-day internationals. I occasionally watch test matches, but most often, if I happen to be in England during the summer, I would still go and see a county match rather than a test match. So I still go and see cricket occasionally, but that fire, that passion is gone, and it's gone because of that particular experience. So it was odd, it might sound, but it was quite devastating. Suddenly, a very familiar world had collapsed and been taken away from me, rather, not collapsed. Music was, Western classical music was a relatively late entry into my life. I have actually written about this, but I will recount how I came to Western classical music. A very rather well-known poet of Bengal, in Bengali, one of the major literary figures after Tagore, was a very close family friend. I mean, I used to call him my uncle, Taoji. He was so close. And one day, I still remember, he and his wife was a teacher of English literature, sought my father's permission. I was 15 or 16 then, sought my father's permission to take me to see Laurence Olivier's Hamlet, not the play, but there was a movie made out of the play, the full 3.5 hours, not a cinema version, but somebody had recorded video, though there was no video those days, somebody had taken a movie of Laurence Olivier playing Hamlet, and it was being shown in the British Council in Calcutta, and they asked my father if they knew I was a good student of English literature. So they asked my father if I could go with them. So I went. So the film ended around 7:30 in the evening, and we came back to the poet's house. And I was kind of making tracks to go home. It was 7:30, 7:45. I was still a schoolboy. I wanted to go home. And he said, "Sit. Don't worry. Your parents know you're with us, so they won't be worried if you are late. They won't be anxious if you are late." And then he had a gramophone. Those days there were gramophone, no CD players or cassette players. And on the gramophone, he put on a piece of music and he said, "Sit and listen to this." And the music unfolded, and I was just completely overwhelmed by what was playing. And I later discovered it was Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. And a new intellectual quest, a new aesthetic experience began. And I actually entered Western classical music. A lot of people find it odd. I entered Western classical music through the most complicated and complex composer. I entered it through Beethoven. A lot of people enter it through Mozart or somebody else, or Handel's, some people do. To enter it either through Beethoven or Bach, the two most complex composers, is the odd way to take. So I entered it through Beethoven. So I first listened to all of Beethoven's 9 symphonies. And that's how the love for music started. And then, of course, when I went to Oxford, there was opportunities galore to listen to Western classical music. One could hear a live concert either in London or in Oxford once a week, twice a week. So I just devoted myself to that. And then I started buying music, first cassettes and then CDs, and just listening to it. And and in between, there was another family friend who was deeply, deeply involved in his love for Western classical music. And I'm not dropping names here. His name is Satyajit Ray. And so I started discussing music with him, and often borrowing records from him or cassettes from him, and then discussing what we were listening. Sometimes we listened to music together. I think I spoke more about music to Ray than I did about films. So this was a great learning experience. And so that's how the love for Western classical music began and how it was nurtured. And it remains as one of my, perhaps the most important pillar of my sustenance. And in the most critical, gloomiest, darkest period of my life, in the real sense of the word, music sustained me. And here I will really talk about a private moment without you having asked me.
Thank you.
So it really is a private moment, but now I'm old enough and it is in the past, so I can talk about it without getting too emotional. I came back from Oxford to be diagnosed with a very, very peculiar form of epilepsy. The form was, and this will surprise most of you who think I am a very eloquent speaker, the form was when the attack came, or the technical term, when the seizure came, I couldn't speak. And I couldn't speak, and after the seizure ended, I couldn't read. So, and this would happen 15, 16, 20 times a day. So there was a period of time of about 3 months, 4 months, till the medicines that are used to counteract epilepsy kicked in and started taking the seizures away and making them less and less frequent. I couldn't do the things I loved doing most. I couldn't read a book. I couldn't go out, because if the seizure happened when I was walking, what would I do? How would I tell somebody? I couldn't tell somebody. So most of the time I was at home. Actually, not even at home. I used to go to Doita's house. Doita had then just started teaching in a school. So her room was empty for most of the day. So I used to just park myself in a room, and I would carry my music with me. Those days were cassettes. And whole day, because I couldn't read, I couldn't talk for most of the time, I would just listen to music all the time, on hours at end. And that's what kept me going for those 3, 4, when actually it seemed to me that it's possible, if this is not cured, I would not be able to work, I would not be able to teach, I would not be able to write, maybe I would not be able to go out. So it was a very, very gloomy time for me, but music sustained me. So in a very vital and real sense, music has sustained me, and it continues to sustain me. I actually cannot think what would happen if I lost my CD collection.
So, Professor, you've authored several books, but you also write articles for newspapers. The kind of research, the method of writing, and oftentimes the biases that creep in while writing as a journalist are vastly different from that of a historian. So, how do you juggle between the two? And also, do you find the two overlapping at any given point? And if yes, have you ever felt the need to deal with that?
Yeah, the registers are different. Writing an academic book and writing for a newspaper, which is supposed to be for the intelligent laypersons, the registers are completely different. So one has to be very conscious of the fact that the registers are different and write occasionally in different styles. The subject you choose to write about could also be different because the platforms are different. And most importantly, lengths are different. So a book you could hold forth, wax eloquent for as long as you want to. A newspaper space is a confined, restricted space, 1,200 words, whatever you have to say, 1,200 words, sometimes even less. And the great advantage of writing in a newspaper is that you don't have to give footnotes, which you have to do when you are writing an academic piece. So, yeah, they are very different things. But I tell you what came to my advantage when I made the shift to write in newspapers and also write academic books. As a student of history, I had learned, which I am trying to teach some of you as well, how to contextualize, how to place a particular event that is happening today, and newspapers deal with the today, the present. How does one historicize a present happening, a present event? What is at the background? Where does it come from? Where might it possibly lead? So there my training, academic training as a historian, stood me in good stead when I wrote from a newspaper. So there was this overlap, of course, but it came to me as an advantage rather than as a disadvantage.
So, Professor, once in class, you narrated this excerpt from Life of Galileo, the play.
Yeah, Life of Galileo, yes.
Yes. And
Bertolt Brecht, yeah.
So, one of his disciples, expressing disappointment in him, says, "Unhappy is the land that breeds no heroes." To which Galileo responds, "No, unhappy is the land that needs a hero." And so, do you believe that the world as it is needs heroes? And would you want Ashokans to be heroes?
The world needs heroes. That's why the world is an unhappy place. Unfortunately, the world needs exemplars. World needs people who they can follow. So we are not this is true because we are not in a happy world. What is if I may say so, what lies beneath that statement? I think that's, when we just quote that statement, that's why you can ask this question. There is something very profound that is being said there. Why do we need heroes? Because large numbers of people that inhabit the world have not yet been able to see reason or been able to follow a particular direction. So we need one person to stand up and say, this is the direction. Okay? Whereas, if society had already found that direction, that one individual would become irrelevant. So we wouldn't need the hero. We need a hero because society is still hasn't been transformed. That is what Brecht is trying to say through the mouth of Galileo. Galileo never said that. This is Brecht saying something through Galileo, trying to say that it's unhappy because so many people still believe, this is being written in 1938, 1939, so many people still believe that Hitler is on the right path. So we need heroes to stop, to prevent, to fight Hitler, right? And it is an unhappy situation. If the world had people that could all stand up and fight Hitler, there wouldn't be any need for a hero. So whether Ashokans want to be heroes or heroines, I think would largely depend on the context in which they are placed and individual choices that they make. It is not for me to tell them, or anybody else, or Alex Watson standing at the back, to tell them that you need to be a hero like Arjuna, or you need to be a hero like XYZ. These are individual choices that are made by individuals. And this is where an education like the one you are getting at Ashoka should help you to make such choices. The only heroic thing you can do is to educate yourself, which in India today is not an easy thing to do.
So, Professor, how do you prepare for lectures? Are these based on the notes which you made several years ago, or do you reread the material and then profess your most recent insights and thoughts?
So when I first decided I would be a teacher, and I had just got my first job, and I was in 15, 20 days' time, I would be entering a classroom for the first time to teach. I went to my teacher, who had taught me as an undergraduate in Presidency College, who I still believe, and I say this, many of you have heard me say this also, is the best teacher I've ever had. And I've been to 3 top institutions in the world, but I have no hesitation in saying that he was the best teacher I've had. Much of my teaching is actually modeled on him quite unashamedly. His name was Ashin Das Gupta. He was a historian of 18th century trade in India, with a lovely book on Surat. So I went to see him, and I said, "Sir, I'm going to teach, and is there any advice you'll give me before I enter a classroom?" So he gave me 2 pieces of advice. One, I'm afraid I have not been able to follow fully, and the second, I always follow. The first advice was, never go into a lecture without 5 to 6 hours of preparation behind it. Okay? The second piece of advice was, never go into a lecture without preparation. If for some reason you haven't been able to prepare for the lecture, go and tell the students that I cannot lecture today because I haven't prepared. Okay, and if there are any of the first year, the founders batch students are around, they will remember a couple of times I had to tell them. Those were early days in the university, and then I was the vice chancellor, so often other things impinged on my teaching duties. And there are 2 occasions I remember when I actually went and told the class that, sorry, I can't teach today because I haven't had time to prepare. So, yeah, no, where I haven't been able to follow my teacher's advice completely is to prepare for 5 hours for a lecture. But no, but I do always prepare for a lecture, at least 2 hours. So I may not actually sit down at a desk and write down things that I'm going to say. Sometimes I do that too, but I'm thinking about the lectures all the time. Okay, so I might be in a car going from here to Delhi and I have a modern India class the next day. So much of that journey is actually what occupies my mind is how I'm going to handle what I'm going to teach the next day, what are the facts that I need to marshal, what anecdotes might be enlightening. The only things I don't think in advance are what Sanat called my digressions. Those come as I'm speaking. Yeah, so I do prepare, and of course one has to, as a teacher, one has to keep up with the literature. So I keep adding to my stock of reading. And the other thing that has changed in my life is I was a very elaborate note taker from books, and I trained myself. My teacher taught me also, trained myself how to take notes, how to summarize an argument. So the first shift I did from that, so I still have those files, the first notes that I made from Irfan Habib's Agrarian System in Mughal India. I made them in an exercise book. I still got that exercise book. So if I lose my copy of Agrarian System in Mughal India, I still have those notes. Okay, so but the other thing is then I started buying books, and then I was no longer making notes from books. I was making notes on the margins of the books. So many of my books you will find, or most of my books, are very heavily underlined with marginal annotations, or at the back of the book in the blank pages I have noted my thoughts or something, or page numbers or something like that. And so that's continued. Nowadays I tend not to take notes because they are my books. I don't need, this is a very bad boast, I don't need any more to go to the National Library. So most of my money is spent in traveling in comfort, buying music, buying books. Buying books is my heaviest expenditure. I buy roughly 10 to 15,000 rupees worth of books every month. Okay, and I have, between Doita and myself, if we put our libraries together, it will be a small library of 25,000 books. Okay, so because I have those books, I don't need any more to take notes, so I make marginal notes, I read, and I find that maybe under Doita's influence, I remember more as well.
Are there some moral principles which you absolutely abide by? And was there a turning point in your life which solidified these beliefs? And do you see Ashoka operating on a similar value system somewhere?
Let me answer this question by first confessing a bit of autobiography. I mean, I don't know if Doita has written about this. As a young man, I was a man of very volatile temper. Occasionally you see flashes of it in class. Very occasionally. And I had a very cutting tongue, so much to my shame. And I was known to be a very arrogant person, and I suppose I was a very unpleasant person as well. And one of the great things that Dwaita did for me is she consistently and constantly pointed out when I was being unpleasant. And this, over the years, she keeps plugging away at this. She even does, even today. So even today, as I do, I tell her that, unpleasant thing happened in class. I had to scold so-and-so student because he or she was doing this. And she would say, oh, you needn't have put it like that, You could have told her so-and-so. She will do that even today. So what has happened is I have mellowed. I have mellowed under her influence, and I have mellowed with age, I suppose. So with that mellowing has come, or related to that mellowing is a realization and a commitment to ahimsa. A very strong commitment to ahimsa. So, and this is not ahimsa physical violence. I'm hardly capable of that. But I even try to avoid violence with the tongue. I don't always succeed. My experiment with truth. So, but that is a moral principle I live by. Yudhishthira was asked in that great encounter at the end of the Vanaparva by Dharma. So, what is Dharma? And he says, non-cruelty to living beings is the ultimate Dharma. There's a particular Sanskrit word, Alex, that he uses there. It's not coming back to me just now. That's right. Yes. So non-cruelty it's translated as. And yeah, I hold that as a very strong moral principle. And if there is anybody in this room who thinks that I have been cruel to him or her, please accept my unqualified and unalloyed apology.
I feel like we've covered most of it, but I still want to know. So, if you were to write an autobiography, what is the one story that you wouldn't absolutely miss out on?
Autobiography of an unknown teacher. No, so, tough one. I don't think I would write an autobiography. I don't think my life is important enough to be recounted. The one story I won't miss out on, yes. And this is a story some of you have heard from me. It's the most important lesson of my life. The most important lesson of whatever represents my intellectual journey. And for those of you who haven't heard it, I will say this openly, and some of you have heard it, so please forgive me. End of my first year, towards the end of my first year undergraduate, or maybe the middle of it, college has just reopened after the interruption that I spoke. And Ashin Dasgupta, who teacher I just spoke about, has just seen 3 or 4 of my tutorial essays. He made us write essays, or made me write essays once every week or once every 10 days. And then he said, returning my 3rd or 4th essay, I forget which, he said, you no longer have to write essays for me because I'm convinced you can write English. Write English, and you can write it rather well. Coming from him, this was a very moving compliment. So what I need you to do is, I will give you a topic and I want an analytical point structure. The points that are required to make an analysis of that topic. But I will not turn over a page. So it has to be on one side of roughly what in our days we used to call a foolscap sheet, which is slightly longer than the A4 paper. Narrower but longer. So that's all that he would see. So he was teaching me, in fact, to be analytical. He was also teaching me to be precise. So I remember that particular, I'd gone to his house, that particular evening. The point analysis I had taken to him was on the subject of the Third Battle of Panipat, 1761, and he was reading it. And from his face, we were sitting across a room, and from his face I could see that he was reading it rather appreciatively. And then 3/4 down the page, he stopped, put that paper sheet down, and he looked at me and said, Rudrangshu, why have you written this particular point? So, the stupid fool that I was, I said, why, sir? Jadunath Sarkar has said so. Jadunath Sarkar is a very, very well-known historian of medieval and 18th century India who has a long chapter on the Third Battle of Panipat in his book, Fall of the Mughal Empire. So I said, Jadunath Sarkar has written it. So my teacher took that sheet of paper without even finishing the rest of what I had written. He handed it back to me. So a very startled Rudrangshu Mukherjee looked at him. So obviously the startled look conveyed something to him, and he said in rather a sharp and uncharacteristic tone, he said, the day you can tell, no, he said, he gave it back to me and said, you can leave now. Okay? So that startled me even more. And when he saw that look on my face, he said, the day you can tell me why you have written it, come back. I have never forgotten this lesson. So I might take another person's views, opinions, whatever, but I must be able to make it my own and defend it on my own terms. This is at the very heart of what in Ashoka we call critical thinking. Are you in a position, have you trained yourself to correctly evaluate, critically evaluate a particular position, argument, etc., etc. Okay? It was a very rough moment in my life, but it was a very important moment in my life. It doesn't do me any favors, that anecdote. It's an anecdote that doesn't good, just shows how stupid I was at the age of 18, but I've never forgotten it. And similarly, there's another thing, very funny thing he did to me in class. I didn't learn from it, but since I am in a self-deprecating mood at the moment, so let me share this anecdote with you. He had this terrible habit. When the first time it happened, it was, it was the most shocking thing. He used to give back scripts. We were a small group, 10 or 12 students doing history honors in presidency in our year, so it was possible to do it. So he would give back answer scripts in the reverse order. Okay? So normally you would give the person who has got the highest mark the first script. So the first time it happened, we didn't know he was prone to do this. So, I was sitting there and have I failed this test? People who I know are not as good as I am. They are getting their answer scripts back. What is happening to me? What did I do wrong? Great moment of anxiety. Then finally, my script was right at the bottom, the last script. And he gives it, he's about to give it back to me, and then he pauses and opens the script, and then he says, "Tell me, Rudrangshu, this is a very good script. And it has fetched you the highest mark in the class." Great relief. But tell me, why have you put the phrase, this was a European history paper, there was a question on the 1848 revolution, and why have you put the phrase, "the thundering juggernaut of revolution" within quotation marks? So I said, all of 18 years old, having first read Marx. So I said, "Why, sir? It is a phrase that Marx uses in his essay on civil war in France, 1848. So he closes the script. I still remember the gesture. He gives it back to me and he says, "Next you'll put the word exit within quotation marks and tell me that it occurs in Shakespeare."